besties? Welcome back to Divorced Diaries. This is episode 2. Also, before we get into today's video, I just want to let you know that I did hear your constructive criticism on the previous sit-down video, and not only did I upgrade to a microphone that matches my aesthetic a little bit more, but I am going to just keep the microphone directly in front of me because I totally agree with you with the microphone being off to the side. I've never done a sit-down podcast mic style anything, so I appreciate you being patient with me while I'm figuring it out. And thank you also for showing some love on that first Divorce Diaries video. I really didn't know how that was going to go over, to be honest with you. Like, I knew that it was probably going to be 50-50 because my channel has always been fitness and nutrition and lifestyle and whatever. But that's the thing, is the divorce process and sharing so much of my previous relationship online has impacted my life so much. And I know that just from the little that I've experienced, that so many other people out there who have gone through divorce or who are contemplating divorce have gone through the same things, and sometimes it can just feel kind of lonely. So that's where this series kind of evolved, is just that I really wish that I had a lot more resources than I did, and I just wanted to kind of open up the conversation a little bit more about it, because I think there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of stigma, even like from the people who are divorced themselves, right? Like, it's often an embarrassing thing that we don't want to talk about and we don't want to put on display. And I am just one of those people that puts a lot of things on display. And so, I just feel like it's made me honestly who I am today, and I don't regret it. As much as I regret a lot of things in my life, it's one of those things that I really feel shaped me, and I don't think I would have understood so much about myself and what I needed from a relationship and from a future marriage if I didn't have that experience in my previous marriage. Now, before I get into the topic, obviously going to put out a disclaimer. I'm not trying to sit here and talk shit about anyone in my past life. I put so much on the internet. He was so much a part of that. And this is not like I'm going to sit here and tell you how awful it was, because obviously I know people from Iowa are still watching. What's up? But that's not really what this video is about. So just want to get that out of the way there. I'm really more so wanting to discuss the things that were asked to me when I openly posted, hey, what is it about divorce that you guys either are struggling with in your own marriage or, just in general about divorce? And the two most common things that I got as a reply, and what led me to today's video topic, is number one, how do you know when it's actually time to get a divorce versus working through an issue? And then two, if you do choose divorce, how do you not feel that intense shame and guilt and everything negative that comes along with the divorce? I just kind of want to talk a little bit about it, obviously from my perspective. There's no guest today. In the future, I think I will for sure continue to invite people who have either gone through a divorce or, have some good relationship insight, something like that. But for now, I just want to share my own personal experience, thoughts, advice, everything like that. So without further ado, let's get on into the topic. First thing that I want to mention, and I think that this applies so much to so many different topics in life, is if you are asking yourself, am I in the right relationship? Should I break up with my partner? Should I get a divorce? Should I feel this way? Is this normal? You get it. If you are constantly finding yourself asking these questions, I would personally venture to say that you already deep down know the answer to these questions. And 9 times out of 10, you're hoping that by searching for these things, and I know this is something that I did personally, you're searching for these answers, you're searching for other people to validate the way that you are feeling so that you can build up the confidence in how you're feeling. And this is something that I personally struggled with so much. Anyone who has either had emotionally absent parents or toxic relationships prior to their marriage, if you are somebody who either grew up or dealt with adult relationships who constantly invalidated your feelings and told you that your feelings were not real, or they were discounting them, they were proving your feelings wrong, even though they were your feelings, it can become increasingly challenging to recognize your own feelings, beliefs, morals, thoughts, and what that means to you, and just how to believe them. And I think for me personally, coming out of that type of toxic relationship, we're talking about a person who literally drilled a hidden camera into my nightstand and watched and audio listened to me for weeks before I knew. Okay, that's the kind of toxic relationship I'm talking about. And when you're in that kind of environment for years and you finally get out of it, it can cause you, in my experience, to overlook so many things in your next relationship because you're just simply not dealing with any toxicity anymore. And again, from experience, this can make the most average, mundane, like bare ass minimum things look to be so glamorous and amazing. And that's not to say that they're not, like for me, having a family aspect, having a together family that wasn't divorced, a family that liked each other, somebody who wasn't toxic, who wasn't yelling at me, who supported my gym goals, just like things like that. It made it seem so amazing to me that when you get later on down the line and when you start like having these feelings that are coming up and things that you're questioning, it's almost like you start to gaslight yourself into like, well, maybe I'm just feeling this way because blah blah blah, and I should be grateful because everyone else tells me that I have a good relationship and I have a good family and I should be really thankful and this, and you're just repeating that cycle of telling yourself that your feelings are not real. And this is the number one thing when it comes to even just people who are in relationships that I think are like questioning whether or not they should stay in their relationships. They will immediately doubt themselves, or they will immediately say something that like is so self-depreciating, or like, well, maybe I just think that because blah, blah, blah. And so what do? We turn to the internet. We turn to our friends and our family and whatever, and we ask for advice. And the thing about that is it's amazing. Obviously, like if you have a support system that you can go and ask advice to, that's fantastic. But sometimes when we do that so often, and again, this is something I personally struggled with so bad, was when you ask so many people for advice and what they think and what they feel, it's almost like you're kind of like covering up what you actually feel on the inside. How I think truly when it's time to either like try to put effort into your marriage or get a divorce. And also, as a side note, I'm not a freaking relationship expert, okay? My relationship history, trash. Absolute dog shit. Okay, so like I'm not sitting here saying like I'm the pinnacle of great choices and like you should look to me for advice. Absolutely not. I'm just saying like things that I experienced, and understanding how to come to terms with the fact that what you feel is completely valid and you're allowed to feel those things. And if you ultimately decide that it's not something that you can salvage your marriage over, like how do we work through that, right? So going back to, the first thing about like, how do you know? I don't really know that anyone is ever truly like ready for that decision. Obviously, like with the exception of like infidelity, things that like are an immediate divorce for some people. But like, I'm just talking about being deeply unhappy. And I think there's a big difference between constantly like chasing the next thing and the next like relationship and the next thrill and things like that versus actually being unhappy at your core. And there's a couple of things that I would personally say, to me anyway, like stood out as being the biggest signs that I was deeply unhappy, like with who I was. And the first was that I did not go to my partner with my issues. I went to my best friend. And that's not always a bad thing. Of course, like we have our girlfriends to go and talk to and whatnot. But the way that I talked about my partner behind their back was never how I would want my current partner to talk about me behind my back, And so this is something I think is really, really telling. Like I have friends in my life who consistently come to me talking shit about their partners. And like they may very well be the people that are asking like, how do I know it's time to break up? How do I blah, 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 blah. But like that right there, in my opinion, is such a sign that you are truly like either not being true to yourself, you're not being true to the relationship, you're just deeply unhappy, and you're trying to search for answers elsewhere. And the matter of it is, in my opinion, again, that really lies within you, and nobody can tell you that. And I'm going to give you an example of this. So for me, one of my things that I ultimately realized, and this is like kind of what I said at the beginning of this video, I didn't know it until I was in a relationship where I had this happen. And I kind of briefly mentioned this in episode 1, but like a personal hygiene kind of thing, I never had to think about because I had never been with partners who were not like myself. Like, we go to the dentist, we wash our hands before we eat, like very like obvious. So I thought things. And when I brought it up to somebody outside of my relationship, their response to me was, well, that's not, what did she say? That's not a thing to get divorced over. That's just something where your strengths are his weaknesses. And I literally, in that moment, had I not finally gotten to the point where I felt secure in what I felt, like I probably would have let that gaslight me into thinking, like, you're right, like I'm just really good at hygiene and that person's not. No, absolutely not. No. And so when it comes to that specifically, I realized ultimately that there had been so many things, of course, that were like surrounding that. It's really hard to like talk about this without like giving very specific details. So I apologize that some of this is pretty vague, but it has to be so I don't get hit with a little cease and desist action, But anyways, so that was something that ultimately to me was like, this is how I feel about it. And I am not going to let anybody else tell me otherwise. Okay. And when I got to that point, okay, so like circling back to like, how do you know when it's time? When I realized in my head, this is how I felt, and I said something to myself like, I don't want to be married to somebody like this. And I'm sure that was said about me as well. So like, I'm not perfect. You know what I mean? Like, this is not just like, I'm again not trying to place blame on other people only, because I know that I had a huge part in that. But I said that to myself, and I, for the first time, was like, I don't really care what anyone else thinks about that. I'm not going to run to the internet and Google, like, should I leave my marriage over this? 'Cause there's so many times I did do that. But the answer was within me. And I knew it. And that's not like the reason, obviously, but like that in particular, that moment of like, I feel this way and this is how I feel and nobody can tell me otherwise. Like, I'm not going to let anybody else tell me that what I'm feeling is not valid. It was so much easier for me to understand why that relationship was never going to work. And so I think, when you're looking at your situation and you kind of take a step back and you're just analyzing everything for what it is, you have to really ask yourself, taking the other person out of it, right? Because people are not going to change because you want them to. The only time someone's going to change is if it benefits them, truly. If it's important to them for whatever reason, maybe that is they don't want to lose you, so they're going to change. But like, personal change and growth will only come from within on both ends of the spectrum. So like, you're not going to get somebody to change just because you're saying, hey, I don't like this. Maybe they might change some of their antics and their behaviors and whatnot, but like who they are at their core, and this obviously goes much deeper than hygiene, okay? I'm just giving you the very surface level, like, example of this. But when they want to change is the only time that you're going to get somebody to truly change. And furthermore, in my opinion, if you are constantly feeling like you have to change yourself, this is kind of like the second part of this answer, which is something that I dealt with as well. I felt like the person that I became in that relationship was so not an accurate reflection of who I am. And I was constantly putting on this like show for people who were around me because I didn't want them to constantly tell me that like what I was thinking wasn't right. And this goes so far as like politics and morals and religion and all kinds of things. And so ultimately I put like this mask on of like, oh, this is just like Manders who just agrees with everyone and is like, okay, yeah, like I guess so, like whatever. And that constant repetitive feeling of putting a mask on and not being true to who you are, being true to yourself and all of that, I think is such a big sign that you're not with the right person. Now, obviously, I'm not saying like, okay, go out tomorrow and go file for divorce. Like, it's a huge deal. But what I do want to say is it's not the end of the world. And so much of this shame and guilt and everything that comes along with the feeling of being divorced has obviously been imprinted on us through religion, what Jen and I talked about in our previous video, right? And when you take the religion out of it, yes, it's supposed to be a contract, essentially. You're supposed to uphold this contract, which is supposed to be through the sanction of the church, mind you. But when you take that away from it, if you really think about it, and I've seen people say this before, like on Love is Blind and stuff, they'll be like, oh, marriage is the biggest, most important decision you'll ever make in your entire life. Why? Literally, why? When you remove religion, and of course, I'm not saying like if you're religious and you believe in that, like, of course, but when you take that aspect out of it, that doesn't mean that you should just live a miserable life for the rest of your life and not be true to who you are and feel guilty about something because somebody else said you should. And that's just kind of like the whole, that's if we're going to go back to the beginning, somebody else should not be telling you how you feel. So thinking about what you are saying and feeling and observing about your relationship is so important. That's why I mentioned like how I spoke about my partner behind their back was so telling about the relationship that I was in. It showed that I didn't respect them. It showed that I was deeply unhappy. I was being somebody who I really wasn't. And all of those things to me are worse than getting a divorce. And I think that if we focus more on the reasons why people got divorced instead of like immediately hitting them with like such a negative, like, oh, I'm sorry that you got divorced, sorry, blah, 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 blah. Like, no, I realized that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life like that. I didn't want to drag an adult to the dentist. I didn't want to be a mom. I didn't want to do X, Y, Z. And that's my feelings. And that's it. Like, I made the decision. And when I did, I'm telling you, I am so glad that I didn't let other people impact my decision, because that is ultimately how I ended up in that decision, like in the situation in the first place, is because I I let myself gaslight me into thinking that so many of these things were okay with me when they really, really weren't. And so if I can give you one piece of advice, whether you're in a relationship, in a marriage, whatever, the things that you're feeling about your relationship, you are 100% entitled to feel that way, and you should not be asking anybody else if it's okay for you to feel that way. If you don't feel fulfilled in your relationship, like, should you be able to go to your partner and try to work it through it? Absolutely. Like, I'm not saying that. That's going to marriage counseling and all that stuff. I did it. Like, I think it's important to try to work through things, of course. But like going back to what I said at the beginning of the video, somebody is only going to change if it benefits them. That goes both ways, right? Like, why would we change unless it's going to be of our benefit? We're just wired that way as humans. So if we are seeking the external validation from other people to tell us whether or not we should or shouldn't leave, we need to really look within and ask ourselves, like, is this something that I want to experience for the rest of my life? And ultimately, for me, the answer was no. And I feel so confident in that decision and happy that I made it. And I don't think that there's anything that I should feel guilty about, because I wouldn't have learned those things if I didn't experience it in that relationship, which ultimately caused me to leave that relationship. And then now, of course, being with someone where I don't have those issues. So at the end of the day, listen to yourself. That seems so cliche, but truly, how you're feeling is how you're feeling. Do not let other people try to talk you out of that, okay? And that's where I'm going to leave you with that today, because I can't tell you whether or not you should or shouldn't leave your divorce or leave your marriage. Nobody on the internet can tell you if you should get a divorce. Only you know. And if you do decide to make that decision, it's okay. Like, it's not the end of the world. Your life is not over. There is literally nothing wrong with starting over. Sometimes you have to, in order to know that you need to get divorced from that person, you have to marry them. Like, that sounds so stupid, but it's true. But I think about that. I'm gonna end it there because I don't want to yap too much. But let me know your thoughts on that. Like, why do we think divorce is the worst thing ever? Why? Why are we constantly seeking validation from other people on what we should do in our marriages? You know? let me know. Let me know. And hit me with a new topic for Divorce Diaries episode number 3, because I kind of am enjoying this series. I feel like it's a little bit of a different, like, change of pace, and just like fun to talk about something different. So anywho, I love you guys so much. Thank you as always for supporting me, for watching my videos. I appreciate you. Don't forget to give it 8 thumbs up and click that subscribe. You already know, and I'll see you in next Monday's video.